All right, elders, ego, empathy, and experience. Well, let's define some terms. When I say elder, I'm not talking about some teenager riding a bicycle. All right, let's get this definition right. It can be a person of greater age than someone, right? But a lot of people, they're old chronologically, but they haven't grown up, so they wouldn't meet that criteria. A leader or senior figure in a tribe or other group, like a council of village elders. Those of us that have done shuras overseas get that a bit. An official in the early Christian church or various Protestant Presbyterian churches. Yeah, there's all kinds of, that title is used in all kinds of ways. But what about a real elder? You know, those laid out in Deuteronomy. The ones that are there for when something's too difficult for you. The system is to bring it to the experts, those with more experience, and then they have a ruling and you execute it. We do this all the time in the natural world with professionals that are outside our scope or lane, like a doctor, right? It doesn't mean we, remove our free choice. We go get a professional opinion. Sometimes several, right? Sometimes several. If the professionals are telling you you're wrong over and over and over again, and you don't do it, let's say 3 years of them telling you you're wrong, well, why is the question. Oftentimes it's ego because of insecurity or operating outside your scope, lane, or licensure. That's called usuling. That's another thing. Operate outside your scope or lane, usul. But you see that a lot with the Babylonian rectangle of death. Yeah, these things, dangerous. So to put some backstory to it, read the channel description on YouTube of the purpose of me embracing the Babylonian rectangle of death. In order to have empathy for my brother Rex, I had to walk a mile in his shoes. Because quite frankly, I've avoided the B-rods for a long time due to my previous professions and my tendencies to be introverted. The fact that I don't care about fame, never have. And you can see that proof because I've oftentimes when this channel's gotten big, I've deleted entire posts, hundreds off of this so it would not grow. And that kind of spits in the face of why a lot of people post stuff. My mission of why I post stuff has not changed. And now almost 3 years. Is to be able to transfer data easier to my brother Rex and to learn his gun really, so I would have empathy and experience. When I say learn his gun, the B-rod, Babylonian rectangle of death, because I had no experience in that realm. It's not my shtick. I'm not an entertainer. I don't care about clicks and views. I've never got 1 cent from YouTube, to put it in perspective. Patreon is the only thing that funds my classroom online. That's it. So I haven't embraced it the way other people do. And, oftentimes the ego, the negative ego, your self-image, people use this thing called transference. I'll give you an example. If your dad was an a-hole, you may transfer that negative intersection to every elder in your life. All right? I had an awesome dad, still do. And so, was he perfect? No. Oftentimes we expect perfection from our elders instead of correction. Why do I understand ego so well? Because this thing called pipe smoke, propaganda, inactivity, pride, and ego. That's been the enemy I've been shooting at since day one. How do I know this? Well, I was a member of the 75th Ranger Regiment. And to quote Sheriff of Baghdad, they didn't make smart Rangers, but they made Rangers that wouldn't quit. And so I thoroughly understand what it's like to be indoctrinated. Matter of fact, it was called the Ranger Indoctrination Program when I went through it. They didn't even try to sugarcoat it. And that organization of extremely fit military-age males, you don't see a lot of old Rangers. There's a few, but man, there's a shelf life in the military-industrial complex, especially in the Ranger Battalion. And on teams, you know, in Special Forces, if you're in your 40s, man, your shelf life. And what I realized in the crucibles of outliving my shelf life in certain professions, I got humbled. And if I didn't have my ego humbled through injury, I would have no empathy. Had I not experienced, you know, being the guy who now has outlived their shelf life. You know, the shelf life shattering ego events, injury is a big one. You know, you still get it stuck in your head when you've been, you know, raised literally in the military to, you know, tenacity, sisu, throw your willpower at it. It's not until you have humbling experiences where now you start to realize, hey, I am no longer living up to the standard. I need to switch. You don't see a lot of, there's some studs though. I'm not saying there's not exceptions. I've seen some studs that are in their 40s that just rock it. But for the vast majority of people, especially if they started off in Ranger Battalion, it's a higher impact. I've heard it said by a couple people that, you know, each year in Ranger Battalion is worth 4 in the regular Army. I tend to agree based off of my own injury. After my first 10 years in, I've physically was a train wreck. Because you play hurt all the time. And that was kind of the thing back then. They've gotten better. However, just living in the past of, you know, identifying as this, you see on my channel description, I'm a former action guy. What does that mean? It means I don't meet the standard anymore. I stayed in too long. I should have, because of my ego, I actually put other people at risk because I wasn't up to snuff. And that's a hard pill to swallow. And so what I realized is that the ego, you know, your propaganda, inactivity, pride, and ego, trying to be something you're not, can put other people at risk. It can cause casualties, especially with kids. So you have to put some safety mechanisms in there. True elders, as laid out, are leaders. And you know, I'm not going to get too preachy on you, but if you go back to Jethro and Moses, right? Moses was trying to do it all himself. And his father-in-law, who was a priest, was like, man, what you're doing is not good for you. And it's not, I'm paraphrasing, not good for you. It's not good for the people. You need to select these type of people. Well, he lays out the criteria for leaders. One of the things is they are capable men. Not adolescents, not, you know, arrogant a-holes. They're capable. What do I mean by that? Well, they had to have some capability and capacity. They also have to hate ill-gotten gain. And that's something that the B-Rod, the Babylonian rectangle of death, it promotes ill-gotten gain. That's like taking the reputation of someone else and throwing it in the dirt, or trying to, you know, pose as something you're not, as an expert in something you have no experience in. It's like anybody with a microwave, anybody with a microphone and a YouTube channel is all of a sudden an elder and stuff. Well, if you stay in your lane, there's less stress. It's very, very simple. You know, you look at the fivefold that's laid out. It's some. And each person of a body has a different role. And if you're negative to the body in your impact, when I say negative, I don't mean accountability and pressure. I mean negative as in you're operating outside your scope or lane, which is puffing up pipe smoke. What are the things that he hates? Isn't it related to pride? You know, if you actually would write it down instead of just reading it and regurgitating it, you access this thing called VARK, visual auditory repetition kinesthetic, which is a layman's term used in Western education circles. It's literally found in the Bible, the kings of Israel had to do what? Hand copy. Why? So they would take it on more. If you have real elders, they will have empathy and experience. And they could be chronologically younger than you, but they have more experience in that field, like an electrician or a plumber, right? A butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, right? A mechanic. These are all awesome professions. And if you realize and you set your ego aside for a second or two, that it takes a village. Well, it also takes a village with elders. Oftentimes, elders aren't doing their job. They're not spotting for the youngers. They're not freely giving their experience, which many of us have done that for a long time. But the problem is if those people are addicted, the people that the elders are trying to help, to pipe smoke, the problem is it will hurt others. And so you have to do damage control. It's like somebody on the range and you scream cease fire because there's kids out there and they just keep shooting. You see what I mean? It's like, no, we have to put buffers and safety in to keep the kids off the range. And we have to keep the people that won't listen off the range too, because their pipe smoke will get somebody hurt. Using artillery instead of a sniper rifle. Ask me how I know. Because unfortunately, egos, negative egos, cause casualties all time. People living too much in the past, which gives them this depression cycle, or too much in the future, which gives them anxiety, rather than living in the now with the people that are close to them in proximity and valuing their specific intersection and other people's specific intersection in time. Where's that experience come from? You see, experience isn't something that you just get because you put a name tape on that says elder, right? That's not the way it works. It's, as a noun, it's practical contact with and observation of facts or events. You think snipers are taught patience and observation? Do you think that's like one of the skills in order to have that title? The knowledge or skill acquired by experience over a period of time, especially that gained in a particular profession by someone at work. So was it your job? Not an experience, but experience. And if people would run a system out instead of emoting over choices, had they actually heard and understood and incorporated a system, they would never have made the mistakes that they made. Instead, they want to take this system and try to teach it, but they don't know the system. MUMS is a system I have here. The first M in MUMS is manufacture. That's also manufacture the idea, the manufacturer's intent, who made whatever that is, this shiny pen, this stick, this blade, this life-saving piece of gear. If you don't run MUMS out and go to the genesis of why something is created or manufactured or the idea, right? You won't see the fullness of the intent. Is it to lord over you? Well, if your ego's in the way, you think everything that your elders say is to lord over you versus trying to keep you safe. Because they can see the mistake and fall because they're further along the trail and they made those mistakes and falls. I've made so many mistakes. I've got several books I've tried to, start to write, and one of them keeps coming up because there's a book, it's about cognitive dissonance. It's mistakes were made, but not by me kind of thing. If I was to write it as like mistakes were made by me. I've made so many mistakes. That's why I understand this. Become an expert in your own problems is what one of my teachers says. And I agree 100%. Had I not had the harder impact of outliving my shelf life and injury, putting others at risk, I would not have the empathy that I have now. There's no way. I was too prideful. That's why I can see it. I can see it a mile off. I know, I was a member of 75th Ranger Regiment, dude. The whole organization's built on pride, and rightfully so for what their purpose is in the military, right? Rangers are different. Anyone that served knows this. Like, they're shock troops. You know, when you go from Ranger Battalion to Special Forces is like, oh, wait a second, let me use some standoff and think about this for a moment. Rangers, they go in and they use brutality and tenacity. You know, the violence of action that's within that organization is scary if you actually behold it. They're very capable in that genre, that specific field. But do you want them to necessarily go out and talk to the village elders and build rapport? I wouldn't, right? It's just not their job, right? If you want something obliterated, call the Rangers, right? I mean, really, it's a serious hammer. But they also eat their own. It's a non-sustainable organization over a long period of time of the people that are in it. They need a constant resupply of new people in order to keep the doors open and the capability and capacity of that unit. Unfortunately, people will take military systems and try to use them and transfer them over into civilian life because that's what they're comfortable, because that's what they were raised with. A classic example is MTET or MET-TC. MET-TC. Okay, so let's break that down just for a second. It's used as a jargon and has been used as jargon of an acronym saying, well, then consider everything. Just like ISR somehow turned into the use of it's just drones. It's not. If you actually break it down, or do you have troops? Why is there troops and civilian considerations? Why are they separate? So troops are a member of an army. Well, how big's an army? 200,000 plus people? Do you have 200,000 plus people? So MET-TC is probably not going to work for you because you don't have the building blocks of it. Just like Ranger tactics. Do you have indirect support weapons? Do you have belt feds? Do you have the radio and what's behind it? Man, most of that stuff doesn't even apply. You could take a black marker and just start on military manuals. If you go back to the manufacturer, the idea of why that tactic, why that thing was invented in the first place. There's better ones from military circles that do fit the context, such as GLEO, which works with the locals, the geospatial. What? Yeah, it's a whole nother class. This has been debated in the War College, but it works better in a civilian context. But do you know the terms and how it's where's the manufacturer of that idea? Was it made for you or was it made for the military? The issue I see within the prepper sphere is people are trying to they have no familiarity with military stuff, and they spend all this time trying to replicate the military. Do you think the Taliban won because they followed the Ranger Handbook? I'm just asking. No. You know, when you embrace a real shepherd overseas, you see them for real. And they look at us like we're retarded when we start talking about our sweet feed and electric fences. Because they have such a relationship with their herds. They're with them all the time. They reach out and grab them. They train them. You know, we're driving by on convoys and their sheep don't dart and run into, the vehicles and get hit. They're sometimes, but rarely, because it's such a high value to them. Because they're real shepherds. Basically doing the same techniques that have stood the test of time for thousands of years. Do you think those are elders in the shepherding genre? You bet. Partisan permaculture is based off of experience of studying at the feet of those masters in their lane. They defeated empire because of experience, handed down through elders through generations. The problem is people nowadays with the B-Ruds, Babylonian Rectangles Death, they look at something once, they memorize the buzzwords, they regurgitate it and try to teach it as if they're an expert. And they miss, had they just slowed down, stop, look, listen, smell, and went through mums for real instead of trying to teach it as a new buzzword, they never would have made some of the mistakes they've made. They would have listened to their elders who had real experience. One of the medical courses I was attending, we had so many hours we had to do, and I loved the hospital was close to this hospice, and we would go to the hospice and interact with the elderly a bunch, and I loved it. Like, a lot of people didn't like it because they would hem and haw, but I saw these, it was like these gold bars that were thrown in this terrible situation that, they're not around their families are gone. They kind of like, they discarded them like trash. They're so valuable. I mean, the containers of information they were and experiences, talking to these older folk was exponential in my education. Out of all the stuff I learned in that course, the stuff that I took later on, again, that was super valuable was that experience of interacting with those elders. They fast forward my perspective on life, what's important, what's not, way faster. You know why? Because a lot of them had experienced loss. If you make enough mistakes and you experience loss, looking back, trying to follow the basics of general order number 2 is what I call it, which is love your neighbor as yourself. You have to love yourself first. Some of you that are entrepreneurs or your own boss, you're the worst boss you've ever had. Seriously, you work yourself to death. Oftentimes it's because of this stuff. Rather than slowing down and vetting people, valuing your real valuables, those elders that are giving to you, that have for years, your access to certain mentors and instructors is a short window. I've said that on camera so many times to try to get people to, actually hear, understand, comprehend, and execute what I'm saying. That's regret. If you attend any of my face-to-face classes, oftentimes I don't think of any of them in civilian context where I haven't thrown up a list of some of my mentors. What they all have in common? They're not here anymore. I wish they were. They're so valuable. I lost those opportunities. But ego or being too busy gets in the way. Rather than, hey, is this a sustainable system? Mums feeds into it. It's a rinse and repeat. It's a Hebraic Asiatic system. Unlike others, because what's the use? Well, the Ranger Handbook was made for Rangers, man, not for you. What? Can you maintain those skills? Do you have, the budget of the 75th Ranger Regiment? I don't think so. Right? Everyday use, everyday carry plugs into that maintenance, right? A little bit over time, right? Consistency is more important than trying to do it all at once, because that breeds what? A sustainable system. And experience of elders gives you the shortcut. It's the cheat code. Something that's real, something that's tangible. This shemag was given to me by someone who's no longer here. And it's not a rectangle, it's a square. It wasn't add to cart, take a selfie, and post it. Neglecting the experience of your elders is costly. Why do you think? Have you asked why? Really? Are they trying to execute general order number 1 or 2? Are you reading in emotion because of your ego or your transference of negativity? And people are like, you're always yelling at me. You have never heard me actually yell. You might have heard me use strong tone with my dogs on camera once, but you've never heard me yell. You see, that's you transferring emotion where it's not there. What if someone, all the indicators are there, their negativity because of pipe smoke, and they've hurt those around you repeatedly, your kids, the people in your life. And there's every indicator that they've, hacked your phone even. Who does that? What? When you just cut away from it, the problem is pipe smoke, propaganda, inactivity, pride, and ego. I've been very consistent with that. In Ranger Battalion, it was in the era that I should have. There was a lot of angry people, right? The worst job that I had in the military was fire team leader, because you have to deal with privates all the time. And privates do dumb stuff. And people operating outside their scope or lane or licensure, they do dumb stuff all the time because they don't use a system to keep them safe. They don't do due diligence. They're careless with their actions. They set up training that's terrible with terrible backstops, no safety mechanisms, etc. It's just a matter of time until people get hurt. And oftentimes you can see the evidence over and over and over again of burned relationships and people hurt because of this. That's the problem. Are you a capable man? Do you hate ill-gotten gain, or are you about ill-gotten gain? What is the Torah, the law? What is the book, this book here? Oh boy. So I was talking about this book again. Yeah, this book's full of wisdom. What's it say if someone stole someone's sheep? How do they do restoration? If you don't understand this basic concept of restoration, you might want to slow down a bit. Professionals do the basics until they can't get them wrong. People trying to teach land navigation who have never found a grid, it's ludicrous, isn't it? That's the wrong operating system. They're posing as experts in stuff they know nothing about, whether that be room clearing or, military tactics or whatever, or what it's like overseas. Have you even ever been overseas? If you ran mums, what's the idea that you should be an expert on whatever? Well, if you were in the military and your job, your training is to weed through that stuff and see it, okay. But come on, other people, it's just opinionated. And the narcissists that are stuck in this, they dismiss and they devalue their elders and their elders' experience. They just dismiss it. Oh, you're yelling at me. If you're driving down the road with your family and the bridge is out and I'm waving my hands and throwing stuff trying to get you to stop, and all you can do is just turn the radio up louder, put your foot on the gas pedal even more, and start driving your whole family off the cliff. And I've done everything I can in order to keep you from having that damage. But you want to blame shift your terrible decisions to those that are giving you warning? You don't understand the systems in this book to keep you safe. You don't get it. What does that book do? It transforms you into whose image? Not my image. I'll mess it up. But you know what? If someone's been on the road and the trail and understands this because of their profession, understands the cost because they've graduated from just dad status to now grandpa status, mark my words, you finally get that standoff and you look back, hindsight 2020, and you see, your youngins not listening to your advice because they've adopted this part of you, you will be flat on your face and asking for forgiveness. If you're one of his. Mistakes were made by me. That's why I understand it. I have experience with it. And if you use the right system, it doesn't mean you... See, the problem is people think hierarchy is like... It's the Babylonian mindset that gets you stuck in this loop instead of the right loop. I was like, Saul, what do you think about this? I don't think anything about it. Yesterday, I was using heavy equipment, and we got like ice. And I had a very, very scary moment being careful. And I got a 14,000-pound machine that's sliding downhill backwards on the ice. And I'm like, oh, please help me, right? I didn't see that coming. And I'm so careful with that giant machine. And praise God, and don't emote over the word, that I didn't hit anything or hurt anything. And when I put in systems of safety when I'm using that machine, that no one's around, not my puppies, nothing. And the moment my elder in heavy equipment tells me, hey, I want to teach you this or learn this, I'm all ears. I stop what I'm doing because he saved me thousands and thousands of mistakes, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of mistakes. It taught me the system, and I know this much about it. But you get a foot of snow. It's impossible to clear our roads with a shovel. It'd be exhaustion. But listening and being careful, and if you don't use it all the time, you just got to be very, very careful with stuff. It's so dangerous. My genre, military genre, is so dangerous. To stick us to life. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. There's 2 layers to that lesson if you understood how a shepherd uses both of those tools, both of the functionalities of it. Elders are part of that. That is neglected in Western culture, which other cultures, why they're so much better than us in so many ways? Because they respect their elders. They learn from them. They don't discard them and throw them in a building or a home. Why do you think the elder's telling you that? So you can live life and life more abundantly and be happy. If your experience in life is always painful, well, then maybe your system's wrong because you're stuck up in the busyness or this stuff, trying to maintain an image that's false. Well, wear you out, man. Wear you out. So think of all the non-productive actors out there. They've lost their identity of who they are. And that's why they have such terrible relationships all around them. Look at the quality of the relationships around you. And one thing to absolutely take from the military genre is leaders are responsible for everything their unit does and fails to do. If a leader is constantly blame shifting their subordinates or an outside entity for their problems, are they even a leader? Because that's an issue. That's not taking on the mantle of responsibility, extreme ownership, and accountability and pressure. Please, hear, understand, comprehend, and execute what the real enemy is. It's propaganda, inactivity, pride, and ego. It's failure to listen and to execute. Memorizing and regurgitating acronyms or buzzwords or using them wrong is not going to help your growth. Narcissists totally devalue the cost of others in the relationship. Totally. They devalue it. Don't be that way. You can change. You can absolutely change. Did you use some facts and some math on how consistent certain people are in your life? I don't deserve Mrs. Saw. Absolutely do not deserve her. What do I mean by that? She's been carefully consistent and gone through some serious crucibles, man. We've gone through a lot of crucibles. And because a little bit of obedience, of taking on board systems that have stood the test of time, it's saved us from so much loss. It's taught and continues to reteach a survival skill set, which is being happy. Being happy. But make no mistake, if someone continuously operates this way and they devalue their elders over a period of time, don't be surprised when they just lock the gate. Why would they lock the gate? Well, if someone's, a crackhead, and every time they come over, they rip the pipes out of your house, crap on the floor, make a big mess, and leave you with the bill. They do that over and over and over again. Then they take your reputation and your name and they, sell it cheaply down at the bar. And then they want to come back and get more resources from you. What do? You shut the gates. You're like, no, you've misused everything I've given you to this point. You see the guy on the end of the road, and he's like, I need money for food, and you give him some money, and then they go buy crack with it. Now you're going to move into being an enabler of this. No. What's the consistent ledger been on the operating system? Oh, have they consistently operate outside their scope and lane? Oh, and then standoff is required to protect you and yours. Have they violated your OPSEC? Have they brought drama into your life all the time versus trying to help you to get out of the drama? The lies, the fakery. Don't be fake, man. Be real. You were designed for something different than me, and that's awesome. I would hate there to be a bunch of me's around. I'm serious. What's real? What's lovely? What's pure? Love is what? Is it patient? Sometimes, especially people that are introverts, what their expression of kindness is actually telling you. That's their love language. Well, I didn't like the way you said it. Well, who cares about the delivery? What's the context? Where's it coming from? Where's that message come from? An old salty soldier? Someone who's been around egos their whole life? Seriously, some of you couldn't stand like 5 minutes in a team room. You just couldn't. How come I know this? What was my profession? Come on. And that if you outlive your shelf life in that profession, you are being prideful and trying to be something you're not. There's a shelf life. That shelf life is, can you meet the standard anymore? Over years of damage? No. Because now you're not capable to do the job, right? Is the private capable of doing the job of a general or a sergeant or a team sergeant? No. Nowhere near it. They get people hurt when they try to do that. They absolutely do. You certainly wouldn't want me to fly the plane. Plane's going, at Mach whatever. And I was like, well, I've jumped out of planes. I can get in here. I can fly it. Yeah, I hope the pilot punches me in the face, right? No business flying a plane. I've read all kinds of books. How many times I've jumped out of planes or been in planes? I have no business flying that plane. 0. Outside my scope and lane. It's freeing once you realize that when you operate outside your scope or lane, it puts you in this ego loop of propaganda, inactivity, pride, and ego. And if you stay in your lane consistently, it's freeing. Don't try to do the private's job. Don't try to do the general's job. What is your position? Are you the worst boss you've ever had? Well, then fix it. Fix it. I know most stuff here doesn't get a lot of views, and that's not the point. And some people, I had this question, I'll end with this, asked by one of our upper tier students. He's like, I want to share this stuff with my friends, but I don't trust them. Well, then don't share my stuff with them. I'm not about popularity. I'm not about quantity. It's always about quality. That soft thing from special operations, I embrace it because there's truth there. It doesn't mean they use the truth, right? But oftentimes there's a nugget of knowledge there from the military genre. Well, if you didn't live that life, you may not understand that genre because you have no experience. Most of it's not for you. Well, I don't believe you saw it. Well, it's like an E4, E5 trying to talk strategically. You never had privates, man. You never had to set up the range, set up the training plan, forecast out months and years to make the training happen. Why do NCOs, non-commissioned officers, run most of the training? Experience. Infantry Mortar Leaders course, which is generally full of what? Young lieutenants. Who teaches that course? Generally, non-commissioned officers. Ask any officer that went through training. Who teaches most of the stuff they learn in the basics? And these are leaders going through. Who's teaching it? People with experience. The Army understands that because they know that system, that order, right, is necessary. I'm not saying everything's good, but see, if you were in my profession, you would start to triage and realize you don't have soldiers, man. You've got grandmas and little kids and housewives and all that. You think they're going to do platoon exavals? Come on. Come on. That's ludicrous. Step out of the fantasy. Step into the reality. What has stood the test of time? Be a brother operating in excellence in the relationship. Which just means farmer. What? Yeah, what's lovely, what's pure. That's what's important. Remember the real children. They're going to emulate this from you. Ask me how I know. Have your kids, do they have kids? Maybe you need to hear, on board, and execute the wisdom and experience from elders so it avoids you pain and loss. It avoids the poor mentality. What? The poor mentality or the quitters speak. You just quit on people because they held you to a standard. Oh, you quit on me. Why? Because you didn't do what you said you were going to do. You didn't provide what you said you were going to provide. So then how have you failed vetting? Right? Are you passing over opportunities repeatedly? Your opportunity, your access to certain mentors and instructors is a very short window. Seek them out in your life. Learn from them. You may be surprised how much gold is there. If you didn't schedule that in, maybe you're not listening. Maybe we'll see you soon. Shalom.